third or fourth time lucky, hopefully. How did you start going offshore?
Uh, I started scuba diving, and I really loved being underwater. And I was at a diving school, and I saw these guys who were doing commercial diver training, and they were running up a hill with a telegraph pole on their shoulders. There's quite a few of them. And a couple of weeks after that, I was doing the same thing. And after 3 months, I came out as a newly printed baby diver and took a trip to Aberdeen. And within a few weeks, I got a job with one of the best diving companies in the world. And so the games began.
What year was this?
1981, I think it was.
Right, okay.
81.
Can you remember your first job?
Well, yeah, my first job offshore was on a platform called the Byford Dolphin,
Okay, yeah.
and I was just for a saturation tender. I wasn't diving, was helping look after the saturation system, and I had a saturation diver sort of take me under his wing, a lovely guy called Roy Lucas. And one day he was showing me how the bell got clamped onto the system. There are two enormous clamshell clamp components that wrapped around the trunking and the flange, which connected the bell to the saturation system. And he suddenly went cold as he looked at me, and he said, "Whatever you do, don't screw this up." And he got very serious.
No pressure.
Yeah, but the great sadness is that 3 weeks later, the guy who was doing my job did stuff it up,
Oh
and
no.
both Roy and the four other divers were killed instantly in a really horrific incident. And it was this exact job, the guy took the clamp off when the trunking was still under pressure, the whole system depressurized, the internal doors were open, and it was a completely avoidable incident. All it required was a small piston device that, extended out, stopped you taking the clamp off when the trunking was under pressure. And it turned me into a sort of political preacher offshore, that incident, because I couldn't believe how something so simple could have gone so badly wrong.
Guys, I'm sorry to interrupt this show, and I really hope you're enjoying it. One thing I'm going to ask you, if you're listening to it and you're not liking, following or subscribing to it, could I ask a massive favour that you do? It really helps the show, it helps me bring in more people, and it helps me get more stories out there, which in favour brings more stories back in. Let's get back to it. So that was before Piper, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was my very first job offshore, several years before Piper.
Right.
But it did have a very significant effect on me, and I couldn't believe that something so ridiculous could be allowed to happen. I mean, I didn't see it coming because I was as green as grass at that time. But it was a terrible, a wicked and horrific incident. And it spurred me into a sort of political mindset that divers needed better protection, that the industry needed to mature, and that the way in which things were set up offshore were unnecessarily dangerous. I mean, you don't go out to the North Sea as a diver expecting it to be, easy and safe. I knew that it was a very tough environment to work in. But for something to be so ridiculously and unnecessarily hazardous when, for $200 or $300 for a small device would have stopped the being taken off. It was, that wasn't acceptable.
How did you end up on Piper?
The job just came up. I mean, what do some people call divers? Seagulls. because they arrive, they fly in and they fly out, and it just depends on the contract and how long the contract is, and it was just another job, so I went.
What was the job you were doing?
It was the subsea inspection program for that year,
Right.
part of a 5-year cycle, all agreed with the certifying authority by the oil operator. And then they contract out the work to one of the diving companies. The diving companies employ people who've got inspection diving qualifications of various types. Everybody's got the appropriate ticket. And my job on Pfeiffer was to coordinate the work that the divers were doing, to take the work pack and make sure that all the inspection tasks and a couple of construction tasks as well were done efficiently and effectively, and that all the paperwork was properly collated and sent back, so that could then be presented to the certifying authority. And then the certifying authority issues the appropriate certification, which is satisfactory for the insurers to insure the platform. So it's important. It's important stuff.
What was life like offshore back then?
Well, I don't have anything to compare it with, but I can tell you what my phone was like compared to other platform, and it was a bit of a dump, quite frankly.
Oh, Piper was already by then.
Oh gosh, yeah. It was very, very rough and shoddy, and the accommodation was cramped, and I mean it was okay, but compared to some of the other platforms, it was it was probably in the bottom 10%, I would say. And if you ever had the good fortune to work on a Norwegian platform, then it paled into insignificance. It wasn't a comfortable platform.
That's still the case these days, to be fair, with regards to the Norwegian platforms being the haven that everyone wants to go to. I think I put a video up on one of the social medias not long ago, and I think majority of the comments were, "Yeah, get out the UK North Sea. It's far better in Norway." Was quite a lot of the comments put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear it, but I suppose not surprised.
Nothing changes, eh? How many trips did you do on the Piper before the disaster?
Not many, 2, I think. I mean, I was doing 4 on 2 off, I think. So it's probably the third swing. I'm not sure.
That night, how long? Well, prior to the night, how long had you been on the platform?
It was actually my last night. I was doing all my tidy up for my handover. I was due off on the helicopter the next morning.
Can you recall that night? Were you on night shift? Were you?
Yeah, we were doing nights for various reasons. I think there was a lot of scaffolding going on. We were in a partial shutdown.
Right.
So there was a lot of activity going on. There was a lot of maintenance and inspection and renewals. And I think that there was a pretty big scaffolding program which was going on in the daytime. And obviously you don't want divers being skewered by the occasional dropped scaffold pipe. So we were working nuts.
Can you take us back to the night on what kind of you went on shift and where it went from there?
I went down very early because I wanted to get completely on top of my paperwork, and it was just a regular night's work. Really, there were inspection tasks going on. It was slightly disrupted. There were other things that were stopping us from working, other activities. So we'd had a couple of hours when we couldn't have divers in the water, but we were all fully running. I think we'd had one lad in the water already. He completed a dive. And then Gareth Perry Davis went in, and he had only just been in the water for a few minutes when the explosion took place, which was very fortunate for him because it meant he didn't have a decompression requirement. And he rushed back to the wet bell.
Right. And then, well, I mean, because I take it you were out on deck at the time. But you must
Oh,
have you
well,
must
for
have felt
me,
the full impact.
the first thing that I knew, because I was actually in my office, I shared an office with the diving superintendent, and I was doing the usual thing, shuffling paperwork, planning the dives through the shift, and then the ceiling landed on my head, and the explosion that occurred initially was really very close. It was probably only, I don't know, 15 meters above our office. But and thankfully our office was built to be explosion proof, but it still knocked the guts out of it. So, I had several four-drawer filing cabinets in the office, and they fell over, and ceiling panels fell down, and all the lights went out. And of course, um, anybody who's listening who's got any kind of military experience will know that an explosion is more than a bang. It goes right through you. So it was a pretty huge thing that occurred initially. And Stan Cloud, the diving superintendent, was sitting just in front of me, and we picked ourselves up off the floor. And he said, help me find the breathing set. So I scrabbled around on the floor. It'd come off the wall. I helped him into it. He said, I'm going to go and check out the dive skid. You go and figure out what's going on and how we're going to get out of here. So he went one way and I went the other.
Did you see him again?
Yeah. So what Stan did was it took a while to get outside for various reasons. And Gary had been brought back. He swum back to the wet bell, came up very quickly, was recovered very quickly. But even though he didn't need to be recompressed to decompress, technically he'd done what was known as an emergency ascent. And that means that you should go into a chamber and be recompressed. So when Stan got outside, Gary was already back in the chamber and blown inside the chamber and blown down, which were in the circumstances was the wrong thing to do. In terms of diving procedure, it was exactly the correct thing to do. But obviously the situation was very serious, and Stan told the dive team to go inside the little accommodation area that we had with the office and so on. And he stood in front of the chamber with all the dials to try and get Gary out as quickly as possible. So he opened the valves, and then he turned around behind him, and there was, I don't know, half a dozen or more quads with 9 bottles each of pure oxygen in them, because we would use pure oxygen during the decompressions. And they'd had burning oil sprayed all over them. And there was a pool of burning oil that was creeping towards Stan as he stood next to the chamber. And he said he looked at these, you have these huge dials, very, very accurate dials on the chamber, side chamber. And he was looking at those, wondering how he could get more air out of the chamber. So he looked around and he opened every other valve, drain valves and such like that he could, whilst he's watching the burning oil creep towards him and the blazing oxygen quads. And then eventually the door opened, and the chamber had reached surface, so to speak. And he pulled Gary out, and they went back through the little accommodation area that we had. We had a little little tea area, a photo lab, and then 2 offices that were inside this sort of bomb-proof container-like structure. Now, while Stan was doing that, I'd gone up one of the stairways to see what was going on. I thought the first thing I'd check out was our designated lifeboat. So I just followed the normal route, and as I got up to we were on the cellar deck. I went up to the next level above. I walked past the entrance to the control room, and one of the operators who'd been really quite knocked about in the explosion was being carried out of the control room. He looked in a bad way, and was about to be carried down the stairs. I went towards the pedestal for the crane. You had to walk around the outside of that to get to the next stairwell to the upper deck where our lifeboat was. But there was too much smoke to do that. I, basically was faced with a wall of smoke. Now, I'm glad I didn't try and walk through it, because I would have just walked into the middle of an oil fire if I had. I couldn't actually see a fire at this stage. All I could see were some very small fires that were dotted around on the center deck. But there was a lot of smoke that was pouring out around different parts of the platform that I could see. But the smoke restricted my access. So I just walked back. I walked back to the northwest corner, back down the stairwell, back along the cellar deck, and into the office complex. Then I went back out. I found out at that point that Stan was with the divers. They were trying to get Gary out of the chamber. I walked back outside again, went up again. People had started to gather on the northwest corner because it was free of smoke and fire. So there were, I don't know, 6 or 7 of us standing there for a minute or so, talking. One guy said, "Oh, it can't be that bad. The fire alarms haven't gone off." Another guy said, "Did you hear the scream before the explosion?" And a sort of conversation ensued, and he said, "Oh, it sounded like somebody was being murdered. It sounded like a woman being murdered." And of course, that was the gas escaping from the blanking flange. Anybody who knows exactly what happened technically will understand what was going on. But it was gas and condensate spraying out from a blanking flange on a pipe that was then vibrating and making a screaming sound, and that preceded the explosion. That was the source of the gas that exploded initially. So I then went back down the stairwell, and I was greeted by Stan and Gary and the whole dive team. They were walking towards me. And so Stan looked at me and said, "What's the story?" or something like that. And I said, "Well, we can't get to the lifeboat. We can't get to the heli deck. Can't get to the galley. There's no way up." I'd established that because of all the smoke. And I was looking around. The divers then found one of the big chests with life jackets in them. So one of the divers opened that up, as I recall, and was handing them out. I looked down and I could see a hatchway that led down to a platform, very small platform, underneath the cellar deck. And I think it had lights and maybe a radar or something. Probably not a radar, but certainly some lights, some navigational kit on it. So it is a vertical ladder down. So I thought I'd take a look-see. I climbed down, and at that point, I could see how bad things were, because I could see right underneath the platform, and I could see the wellhead area was completely ablaze. There was a huge oil fire there, and I realized how significant things were at that point. So I called up and I said, "We got to get off, guys." And there were some capsule life rafts in a row where the dives were standing, and they had ropes next to them. And I said, chuck the rope over and let's climb down the rope. And so that's what we did. When I got on the rope first, I was the first one on the rope. It slipped. It actually had slack in it. Unfortunately, it's my fault. I'd kind of tied it on incorrectly, not realizing that it was secured with a shackle. And so I fell about, I don't know, 10 feet or so, hanging onto the rope. And so then it came fast with a jolt. And thankfully I managed to hang on. And so I shimmied down the rope. I'd always been quite good at ropes at school in the gym. And I was quite happy about that at that point. And yeah, and so the dive team and some other guys followed me down, and we got onto the spider deck level. So that would have been, I don't know, 10 feet or so above the sea level, and it didn't have any decking, just some companion waves along the members, the horizontal members. And I had a look around. I could see a fast rescue craft off to my right. It had come from the standby boat, so it was a rib with 2 or 3 guys from the standby vessel on board. And I looked, and I could see on the second leg in, not the corner leg, not the northwest corner, that there was a vertical ladder that went down to sea level. So I called their attention, pointed at the vertical ladder, and got a thumbs up, and then walked towards the other leg along the companionway. And I can remember there was these blazing objects falling down from above. It was really strange. It's like being in a Jason and the Argonauts movie where some monster was chucking fireballs around. I've got no idea what they were, and they were dropping down into the sea. And I didn't like that, so I had to walk towards them. Anyway, I got onto the leg, went down the ladder, got onto the rib, and various people followed me. People were still climbing down the rope. We had to make sure we didn't get smashed by the underneath of the members, because it was about a force 4, I think, that night. So we were moving around a little bit as people were jumping in. And then when we had a boatload, we went off to the Silver Pit that was probably, I don't know, 150 meters away. Converted trawler, you can imagine the standard standby vessels at that time. I think it was built to catch fish in 1947, I think. And the crew were paid £11 a day and had to bring their own tea bags.
Bloody hell.
So I don't know how many, with maybe 10 of us, then climbed onto the Silver Pit and gathered ourselves and looked back. And then you could see the entire platform, of course. And if you're familiar with any of the photographs at that early stage in the development of the disaster, there's a huge oil fire that is pouring smoke out of the compression module and the oil and gas separation modules. That's module B and C, so there's a lot of flame coming out of there. That's spreading, and then there's a huge volume of smoke. Then develops a large part of the platform, including the north face and the upper parts of the west face. So we were very lucky where I'd exited the diving modules that we had for clean air to walk into. It's one of the few places where we could do that. And at that stage, of course, all the fire was above us. But we were away and relatively safe at that point. But you could see that it was really serious. I mean, It's an unbelievable sight then. But of course, nothing like what happened shortly afterwards. So we're standing there watching, people climb down the rope, people get scooped up by the rigid inflatable boat. You could see people on the helideck. You could see people walking around, appearing in some of the areas where there were gaps in the smoke. And then the tartan riser exploded. And that's probably the image that most people will see, video image that most people would see if you look up Piper to see a video of the disaster. And what it is the tartan pipeline, 17 miles long. I can't remember how long. Was it 18 or 22 inches? Can't remember. So that was the export pipeline from Tartan, because Tartan didn't have gas process systems. The gas process was done on Piper. So it exported product to Piper. And the pipeline obviously came up with a riser and then into the center of the platform, just above the dive skill, I believe. And with the first explosion, everything got shook up, of course. And then everything started to heat up. And the tartan pipeline, where it entered Piper, was the first of the other major components to fail. And because there was no non-return valve on the seabed, and unlike the pipelines in the Norwegian sector, by the way, there was no subsea non-return valve. It fractured, and when it did, it just started pouring a huge amount of very high pressure hydrocarbon into the fire. Fireball emerges downwards underneath the platform, very rapidly expanding, hits the sea, bounces up. In the meantime, it hits one of the fast rescue craft, and blows that up, kills two of the rescuers, and I think 4, possibly 6 of the survivors that they picked up. It was petrol. It got their fuel tanks. Then the ball of gas comes up and envelops the entire platform, goes up to, I don't know, twice the size of the platform above the top of the drilling derrick. So 600 or 800 feet, I guess, something like that. And stays there for a couple of hours, burning away. And it was the most extraordinary sight. It's the most incredible thing to witness. And my thoughts went to the Hindenburg. You know, that remarkable footage of the airship.
Yeah.
Explodes and burns. It was, you knew that you were witnessing something of historic significance, or I did at least. I guess that was just how my mind worked.
See the explosion, the main one, so to speak. Did you feel the impact of that 150 meters away or so?
You felt the heat. You didn't get any blast from it, but you felt the heat.
Yeah.
And of course, you then start wondering how many of your mates are going to make it back. Now, thankfully, the dive team we were all on the lower part of the platform. As a group of people, we're probably the best trained in terms of self-surviving. And the very nature of your work means that you're very intensely focused on your surroundings. You're very good at self-rescue. It just naturally the case with being a diver. Very coordinated, very disciplined as a team. And we were moving as a unit, but only about half of us had got off before maybe 2/3 before the second explosion, before the tartan explosion. I think 3 or 4 of our team were on the spider deck level when the gas riser exploded. So they saw the ball of inferno coming towards them and jumped in the sea. Stuck their heads underwater, hung on to the leg. They subsequently got picked up and brought back to the Silver Pit, the standby vessel that we were on, and they had, I don't want to make light of this in any sense, but they had relatively light burns on their heads and faces. So they were, it's blistering, but nasty blistering on foreheads. And they got picked up. They got picked up subsequently by another one of the rescue craft. The rep didn't make it. The Occidental rep, Barry Barber, who was a lovely Australian guy actually, who worked very closely with us. He was the Oxy representative, working closely with the dive team every day. I reported to him on more or less on a daily basis. He wasn't my boss as such. Stan Clegg was the diving superintendent, but he didn't make it. He jumped into the water, but he was a little bit older than the divers, the dive team. He smoked, so he probably didn't have quite the same level of fitness, and sadly he didn't make it. But the dive team got off intact. We lost some technicians, and we lost, I think, 1 or 2 of our riggers. Good guys. But I think the survival rate on the dive team was about 80%, which was a reverse of the other teams.
What's going through your head though at this time? Because obviously I guess it's one of them. It's quite difficult to imagine. Well, it's very difficult to imagine, that scenario. But for you to act in that way with the kind of chaos that's going through your head, what were you thinking?
Well, it's very curious what I was thinking. I was thinking about the movie The Planet of the Apes. Now, I'll tell you why. Very final scene of Planet of the Apes. Do you remember it? Remember Charles Biston when he sees the Statue of Liberty?
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah.
Okay, so he realizes that there's been a nuclear war in this crazy planet he's been on, is Earth, and the people who control the countries have had a nuclear war, and the whole place has been blown to smithereens. And he breaks down and he starts screaming, "You did it! You did it! You finally did it! You crazy!" And it's very shocking that. But because I'd been so involved in safety of divers, I wasn't surprised by what, and the bad stuff, the Byford dolphin and other things. I'd lost, quite a few mates diving. 75 divers were killed in the North Sea over the years. It's very dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, I know, 100%.
And I had a few scrapes myself diving. Really got sucked into the thrusters of the Seabeck one once. So I had this sort of epiphany whereby I realized I was present for the big one. And that was a big surprise to me. I wasn't surprised that it happened. And I had this crazy scene came into my mind. But I said to myself, I'm not going to do the Charlton Heston. I'm going to do whatever I can to make a difference, because I'm here. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm alive. So I got busy. And so I started the first thing I did was got a pen and paper. And I started writing down the names of everybody who survived. And then as people came on board injured in various ways, I mean, I didn't even know what this word meant at the time, but I ended up doing the triage on the Silver Pit. So I evaluated people's injuries. I got an able-bodied person to sit directly one-to-one with each injured person. I allocated them a cabin on the vessel, and I, just tried to make sense of the chaos rather than just sit there and watch it. I tried to make it better somehow. And I was very fortunate. I had great clarity of thought. When I was on the platform, and when I understood the extent of what was going on, realized that we all had to get off really fast, spotted the road, made sure that everybody realized that we need to get moving now, and so that a group of 20 or so of us were on that northwest corner. They followed me down. And I carried on with that mindset on board the Silver Pit. And it's probably not widely recalled, or even if it was ever fully understood, that on the Silver Pit, on that standby vessel, the rescue, maybe not, well, to a degree, the rescue, a small part of the rescue, but certainly the management and survival of the survivors was coordinated by the divers and the dive team. And again, we were very lucky that we were very disciplined. We had a structure, there's myself and Stan, and we were used to operating with sort of military coordination, if you like. And so I made sure that each injured person had somebody to look after them. And then when the helicopters came after, over 2 hours, took 2 hours to get out there, of course, that as soon as I started seeing them, I went up to the bridge and got on the radio and called them up. I mean, that in itself was quite a scene, because Channel 16 was completely overloaded. There were people screaming and shouting, and there was all kinds of traffic, and I just had to keep trying to break through. And I called out for a helicopter that was positioned in a certain position in relation to us. I identified us as the vessel that was in a certain relationship to, off the western side of Piper Alpha. And I got a response. I think it was Rescue 138, they were called. And they came back to me, and I told them how many people we needed to evacuate. I think I identified 7 people as needing an urgent recovery, 3 in particular. So they took 3. They had room for 3. We came over and we got them onto the back deck. Eric, the Frenchman who subsequently died, sadly, who was in a terrible state with his burns, spent time with him trying to keep him conscious. That was very difficult. It's probably the hardest thing of the night for me, was being with Eric. But we got them, stretchered them, maneuvered them up through the superstructure of this old trawler. It's really difficult to get them into a position where they could just be picked up. Into the helicopter. The helicopter took them to the Tharos, where they had some doctors that had arrived by helicopter. So they gave them some immediate care that we couldn't possibly give them. And then I managed to get a second helicopter to get the next 4 off. But before we got to that stage, so the tartan riser had exploded. And we ended up again very close to the platform, even closer. And then I think it was the Claymore gas riser that fractured. And that was about 30 minutes after the tartan. I think it was 23:52. Was that right? Maybe it's 22:52. Anyway, that kicked off, and of course that was an even bigger, longer pipeline. And when that fractured, it was before we'd got the most seriously injured people on board. And we were on the front deck, and the fireball this time came right over the top of the Silver Pit. And that was unbelievably hot. And everybody scrambled to get shade from the heat. Some people managed to run inside. They were close to the doorway. Other people hid behind a stairwell that went up to the bridge. But I was kind of marooned in the open, and I looked down, and there were some various ropes lying around the place, and I could see the little threads of an old rope starting to shrivel in the heat. And there was a spot where some of the paint started to lift. So I went over the side. I went over the far side of the Silver Pit and hung onto a rope. I thought it was a good idea at the time, but it was actually a very bad idea. The Silver Pit took off as quickly as it possibly could, which wasn't that fast. But when you're hanging onto a rope alongside it, you've got a pair of rig boots on it, it seemed like, you were going very quickly. And I had a period of time when I was just hanging onto this rope and nobody knew that I was there. And it was pulling me along, and as I say, there was a little bit of the sea running. It wasn't terrible, I think about force 4. But I started to spend time underwater, because as the waves rolled down the side of the vessel, I would go underwater and then I'd come back up again. But thankfully, being a diver, I was okay to a degree with that. I just thought, I just hold my breath when I'm underwater, and then I'll take a breath when I can. But the worrying thing was I could feel the rope slipping between my fingers, and I thought, if I come to the end of this rope and I can't hang on any longer, I'm done, because I can't get these goddamn boots off. Managed to flick one of them off. I couldn't get the second one off. And I started thinking about my baby daughter. And when I thought about her, the rope stopped slipping. It's quite extraordinary. And in amongst all this, Gareth Parry Davis had spotted me, and he was screaming and swearing at me, telling me to hang on. And then he started shouting at other people to get the skipper to stop the boat. And then eventually it stopped. The boat stopped, and I was pretty worn out by this time, and they pulled me in. And we'd got away from the platform by this time. So I sort of gathered myself and went inside and took my overalls off, threw the rig boot that wouldn't come off my foot over the side in disgust. And went inside, and I found another pair of overalls hanging up, and there's a pair of rig boots in somebody's cabin. I door of the cabin was open. I thought, well, I'm sure they won't mind in the circumstances. So I took those rig boots and I went on and I just carried on with. But that's when I'd already started making a list by that time. But that's when we started to get people who were very badly injured, burned on board.
How much did Piper change your outlook on life?
My outlook on life. I don't think it did change my outlook on life much, but it did consolidate my thinking very strongly. I've worked out what it is I've been doing all these years since Piper, because I've had to work hard on psychologically on handling it, but not in a sense that it's been the most devastating burden. And what I now say is, you have to take something bad and turn it into a force for good. And if you do that, you've got a chance. And I think I instinctively knew that. I instinctively knew it that night. I guess that's what I was doing to try and make a difference. Because you could just not handle it. And I don't blame anybody who didn't handle it. And let me make that perfectly clear. Everybody had every excuse in the world to, not be in good shape, having escaped that fate. But for whatever reason, I just garnered myself and got on with stuff. And I think it was useful. And I've done a similar thing ever since. So I was really, really angry afterwards. I was unspeakably disgusted that such a dreadful thing could occur. And I knew because I knew what the game was. I'd seen enough crap going on around the diving industry to know that corners were being cut and procedures weren't as they should be, and engineering solutions weren't in place when they should be. But the thing was, I'd been at uni and I'd studied political theory, and I knew some tricks about lobbying Parliament and speaking to parliamentarians, and I'd been the press officer for the Divers Union. So in the immediate aftermath of Piper, I became every journalist's best friend. Because you can imagine these guys, they're faced with this crazy industry, incident. And what the hell happened, and what the hell is an oil rig anyway? So I ended up telling journalists, TV journalists, print journalists, members of Parliament, anybody I could speak to, what had happened and what I thought had been going on up there. And I knew a lot because of this work that I've been doing for one of the Divers Union, the Association of British Professional Divers. So I launched myself into all that. I did a lot of very busy work. And I also decided to write a book about it. And that was published on the first anniversary. And Lord Cullen, who you'll be aware led the public inquiry and did a fantastic job. I met him at a conference on the 25th anniversary. And I said, I went up to say hello, and I said, Lord Cullen, my name's Ed Punchard. I don't know if you remember me. And he said, Ed, of course I remember you. You wrote the first inquiry into the Piper Alpha disaster. I thought that was an enormous compliment. I was very pleased with that one. But I did. I wrote a book about it, and but then I decided I had to do something for myself to make sure that I didn't become what I would describe as a disaster has been. Because, you can only stay angry and campaigning around an incident that ages for a certain period of time.
Mm.
And I didn't know what to do really, but I knew somebody who'd done a very interesting university course in Australia. And it was a graduate degree in maritime archaeology, which is basically the study of shipwrecks. And I thought, well, that would be a nice thing to do because I really like being underwater. And I'd always been interested in maritime history, and I'd always liked diving on shipwrecks for fun. So I found out about it, and they only ran it every 4 years, but it turned out the timing was perfect. So about 18 months after the disaster, I went to Fremantle, next to Perth in Western Australia, and I did this graduate degree, and it was great. The sun shone. I did some really lovely diving. It's a really nice place, really easy place to be, and it was very good for me. And then I, tried to figure out what to do after, as a consequence of no longer having a career, place to live, marriage. The whole thing went down the tubes.
Yeah, I take it that Piper would have been your last trip offshore, so to speak. Then was it?
Yeah, pretty much. I did go offshore once, very briefly in Australia. I wanted to just see how I felt. So I was away on a very brief job for a few days.
How did you get
But
on?
no, I didn't like it.
No, I can't imagine.
I didn't like it. The trouble is, you see, when something so violent happens so suddenly and unexpectedly, it teaches your brain that it might happen again. So it's very difficult to eradicate the a sort of background anxiety. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can't carry on having a compelling life. I actually believe the opposite is true. I think you absolutely can. But there are certain things that just stay with you. You can't get rid of it, And they come and they go to a degree. I have noticed now I'm older, time passes, doesn't it? And it's a very long time ago now since Piper, that things creep back. In the year since Piper, I made sure I've stayed very busy. I was always very motivated, but one of the thoughts that I had, mainly as I came to the end of my university studies, which was particularly good because it, not only was a lovely thing to do, it was very demanding of your mind intellectually. The graduate study isn't easy, so it kept the demons away in that sense. But as I came to the end of that, I thought, well, I've just got to make sure I do something compelling, live a compelling life for myself, but also for all the people who didn't have a life. It just seemed that that's why it was I had a responsibility. And anyway, I had an idea for a film and a documentary film. It's about a maritime disaster in Australia. It was about the loss of a battleship in World War II. It's a very interesting, compelling story. And I thought, what a great documentary it would make. And because I'd had a lot of contact with very good British documentary makers and current affair filmmakers, in Britain in the aftermath of Piper. Panorama, First Tuesday, World in Action. Older people will have to remember those as being very high quality documentaries. I got really quite interested in all that. So I figured out how you funded a film and got it made. And that's what I did. I managed to get it made with Channel 9 in Australia, and it topped the ratings. And that led to another film, and then that led to another one. And I ended up with one of Australia's leading, I became one of Australia's leading documentary producers. When I sold my business 4 years ago, we made 350 films, turned over a very large sum of money. I wish I'd got rich out of it. You don't with documentaries, sadly. But I had a great time.
As you're doing this podcast in from your yacht in the Mediterranean. That was a joke.
I wish. But no, look, when you're a filmmaker, which isn't an easy thing in any sense, but when you are, you get to think up ideas, the things that interest you, the things you think will shine a light on humanity. And if you're good at it, you get to make them. And I did. I made some very compelling films that, won quite a few awards in Australia and around the world. I made a multi-award winning film on Piper Alpha for the 10th anniversary. That was a good film. Got the gold medal at the San Francisco Film Festival for that. And it was very moving. It's very personal film. And other films as well won the Science Prize for Journalism in Australia for a film in the aftermath of the tsunami in 2004 in Sri Lanka. We'd been doing a maritime archaeology film there, so we got caught up with it. I just missed the event. We'd just gone home for Christmas, thankfully, because my hotel room was right on the beach, close to Galle, and there's a good chance I would be, if I hadn't got on the plane 4 days earlier, whatever it was, but I wouldn't have been here now. I went back to see my hotel room, and all the furniture were matchsticks. The ceiling fan, the fins on the ceiling fan, it sort of curled up like a sort of an exotic orchid hanging from the ceiling, because the water had rushed in through the front of the room and churned everything around inside. Like a washing machine. That's probably how I would have woken up that morning and not been awake for very long. So I made a film there. That was good. And quite a few others. And that production company, Prospero, it is still going strong. Prospero Productions. It's a sort of a personal edifice to Piper Alpha, because it represents my commitment to having a good life, to living a good life, compelling life, when so many people couldn't. Because it also enabled me to make the film for the 10th anniversary. For the 20th anniversary, I decided that I would start a scholarship scheme in the name of everybody who was lost on Piper. So I have this ambition to have 167 scholarships for the people who were lost. It hasn't done fantastically, but I've got 26 of them done so far. They're done at Aberdeen University and Robert Gordon's Institute in Aberdeen, funded by APITO, the offshore standards organization, who've been enormously generous in doing that. So I try and do something on each one of the anniversaries. And now I've sold my production company. I give presentations on Piper. So if you're out there and you work for a decent company, I would be delighted to give you a presentation on Piper Alpha, but it will cost you a scholarship. That's the deal. So I try and get
That's a nice deal, though.
Sorry if it's all right.
That's a fair. That's a fair deal.
Yeah.
What advice do you give though when you're speaking out?
Well, oh God. Well, speak up, I guess. Speak up. Always speak up if you see something that's wrong. I mean, I think that there has been a significant change as a consequence of Piper, and in particular as a consequence of the Cullen inquiry. But I am aware that bad stuff doesn't go away, and I've still got a few mates who are involved, and one of them said to me that, and he's a very senior contemporary of mine. He said that a couple of years ago, he was a health and safety, he was at the HSE as one of their diving inspectors for a while. And he said that, certain procedures hadn't been put into place on a particular site, and certain equipment hadn't been installed. And the thing that was said to him was, well, because there hasn't been any more Piper Alphas, has there? Well, yeah, but if you want to make sure there aren't any more, then you have to keep on doing the stuff that stops them from.
Yeah, maybe not a clever thing to say, but each their own, I guess.
So, so I'm aware that, things are not perfect. I think they're better than they were from what I can tell. Yeah.
Do you think you're still affected by Piper even now?
Yeah, I am. I am, because that thing about living a good life, it'll never go away. And, you get shudders. I described it as that. It's like somebody walks over your grave every now and again, but they're not infrequent. But I just say to myself, this is a small price to pay. And I say to myself, well, you got to take something bad and turn it into a force for good. And I think if you do that, then you can get through, because you can't bring them back, right? There's nothing that you can do to stop it from happened. But what you can do is take your understanding and the credibility that you have, having been through something like that. You can take that bad thing and you can turn it into a force for good. And you might say to yourself, well, how do I do that? Well, you do it by coming up with a plan. You have an idea, scholarships, a book, a film. Come up with an idea. Oh, it doesn't have to be anything grand either. You can just decide that you're going to work in an outreach center or something. There's plenty of good stuff that you can do. And keep a good heart and live a good life, because you know that there are people who can't, because they're not here. And that's how you get through.
Do you think there's anything you would have done different that day?
I wouldn't have jumped over the side of the boat, that's for sure.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. That's really stupid thing. Well, was it stupid? It's understandable, but I wish I hadn't, because yeah.
Obviously, with your lectures and stuff like that, what's one thing you're hoping in particular that people take away from
it? I'd like them to think that you can get through bad stuff when bad stuff happens, because the bad stuff the bad stuff happen, of course we all do, but my point is that bad stuff, generally speaking, is nowhere near as spectacular as Piper Alpha. It could be a car crash, it could be a miscarriage, it's, losing somebody you love. Um, and we all have to find a way to get through. I mean, the loss of a career is a very bad thing. Plenty of people lose work. But you've got to take something bad and turn it into a force for good. And I don't know, how you do that other than try and knock it out when it happens to you. But you have to keep a good heart, and you have to find a way to maintain a perspective when the going gets tough. I have all kinds of little sayings that I keep in my head. When you fall off your horse, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you start all over again. I mean, they sound sort of hackneyed and silly, really, but they're actually really valuable. Um, I'm really pleased by podcasting. I listen to podcasts. They're so much better, I think, than standard television journalism, where it can be so adversarial and short. There's a wonderful thing that happens within a podcast where two people engage and they get to explore concepts really deeply. And I've heard quite wonderful stuff, psychologists, people who've been through different experiences. And I think there's great inspiration that can be drawn from this media form. And I'm a filmmaker, right? I mean, I used to be a deep sea diver, but I'm a filmmaker. So I spent, decades thinking about what makes a compelling narrative, what makes something accessible and worthwhile to listen to watch as a human being. And I think podcasts are a really wonderful new form which gives you the opportunity to understand the human condition. And you can, I certainly was able to explore that as a filmmaker. I mean, not all my films were profound by any means. I mean, some of them were, I did a thing, one of my series is Outback Truckers, and it's just a really fantastic thing about guys who drive big trucks in Australia. It's still got, a very high, what I call a very high integrity of intent, where you actually get to understand these people who do a really tough job, and they do. There's a genuine heroism that goes on in the work that they get done. Not everything is highfalutin and deep. You can find good, worthwhile, valuable material and stuff which is lighter. Every now and again, you get something to do something very profound. So keep your eyes open, I think. Look for an understanding of the world and humanity. It's out there. It's written in books. It's in good films. It's in good podcasts. And if you're struggling, if you go there and you dig around, you'll find good stuff that will be supportive. It'll help you. Because life isn't always easy. Kurt Vonnegut, the wonderful American author, said, "Life is fired at you point blank." He's completely right. He's completely right. He was a prisoner of war in World War II, American God, and he was incarcerated in Dresden at the time of the terrible raids. So he'd seen some bad stuff, and he let it all out in his writing. And there's a few of his catchphrases that I really like.
I mean, looking back on your career, is there any moment in particular that stands out as your proudest?
Offshore.
Just in general.
Okay, well, offshore it would have to be Piper. Of course, I'm glad I held it together that night.
Mm.
I was very, what's the right word? I couldn't talk. This is the one thing that I couldn't talk about for many years. I, uh, those hours, well, however many hours it was, 8 hours was it, between the thing blowing up and then getting on the helicopter. I was euphoric through it. I had a very clear mind. I was effective. Uh, I I found it light and easy, and I was ashamed of it. Um, eh? And then something happened. Because I didn't understand. There's a photograph of me. Getting off the helicopter at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, and I've got this huge smile on my face. I look like I've just won the lottery. And I hated that photograph for many years. And then by 9 years, I think it was after the disaster, I saw a movie that had Jeff Bridges in it, um, called Fearless. It's by a wonderful Australian director, as it happens, called Peter Weir. And it's about a man who is on a plane that becomes dangerously, is damaged, and it becomes dangerously unstable, and eventually, after a couple of hours, it crashes at a place called Sioux City in America. But he had tremendous clarity of thought, and he had this euphoric experience. It went on for weeks and weeks, uh, and he felt he was indestructible, and that's how it was for me. But when I saw the movie, I realized that I wasn't alone. And now, if you look up that movie and you read about, Google's psychological response to disaster as represented by Jeff Bridges in the movie Fearless, there's academic papers all about it. That some people, not many, some people in certain circumstances have this unusual reaction to it where they're effective and euphoric, and that was me. But I'm glad and grateful that I was that way. Um, but no, I'm also very glad that I was able to build a compelling life afterwards. That I was able to spend all that time making films, and I mean, I mentioned the film about the that we made in the aftermath of the tsunami. It won the Australian Science Prize for journalism because it explored, what I would call the controlling idea for documentary. Every documentary should have a controlling idea. The controlling idea for that film was, are we born good or are we born bad? And what it did was that we followed individuals who just arrived in Sri Lanka in the aftermath, doctors, a piano teacher, an aid worker, but they didn't come as part of some big machine. They just got on a plane and went there to help out. Now, when I saw this going on, because I'd gone there to pick up the pieces of the maritime archaeology film that I'd been making about shipwrecks, Dutch East Indies shipwrecks. But I saw these people and I looked at them and I wondered, there's a French carpenter who just arrived with his toolkit And, he found, somebody's home, and he started to help rebuild it. Now, I thought this is a unique behavior. I mean, I've made wildlife films and I've looked at animal behavior, and here I was witnessing human behavior. But it's unusual because Richard Dawkins will tell us that we're completely selfish and we don't do anything other than look after our own gene pool. And this doesn't fit with that paradigm. So that was the film that we ended up making. We followed these people, and then we had a series of academics who deconstructed it, talked about it, the psychology of it, the nature of what was going on, and it was a very interesting thing to explore. And I remain very pleased that I was able to capture those moments, those people doing that, and then create a narrative around it, which tells people who watch the film that there is something special going on about what it is to be a human being. It's a very pleasing thing to have been able to do with my life.